there's a degree of running a business, particularly when you've got partners and all those types of things, where like I think you've got to treat it like it's a relationship, and you've got to show up in the way that you would show up to any other relationship that's good and healthy. Like you've got to be willing to be vulnerable. You've got to be willing to be honest. You've got to be willing to like figure stuff out and have moments where you're selfish and have moments where you're selfless, and like own all of that stuff and just kind of keep moving forwards with it and hope that the people around you are trying to do the same kind of thing.
Welcome to Character. I'm Anne Benveniste. These are honest conversations with New Yorkers who inspire me about their journey to figuring out who they are, what they want to say, and the work that was required to get there. My guest today is Rob Hubbert, a founding partner at the Brooklyn-based creative design studio Super OK, where we recorded our interview. Rob grew up in Kent, in the south of England, and spent the first decade of his career in advertising, running partnerships for the Cannes Festival of Creativity, before eventually charting his own path as an entrepreneur. Outside of work, Rob is a devoted record collector and occasional DJ with a deep love of music. He's also a very gifted photographer. I invited Rob on to talk about his transition from corporate life to entrepreneurship, but also because Rob has really done the work on himself. He really knows who he is, he can laugh about himself, and he's open about the challenges he's navigated, both personally and professionally. So it makes for a super rich conversation about personal growth and entrepreneurship. Let's dive in. Rob, thank you so much for agreeing to be on Character and having this conversation with me today.
Thanks for having me, Anne.
Yeah.
Nice to be here.
Amazing. One of the reasons I asked you to come on is because you've always struck me as very connected to yourself. And it's clear to me from just what you post on your Instagram and the conversations we've had that, you've been through some stuff and you've done work on yourself, right? And you kind of understand that personal growth journey. And to me, I think that's really reflected in what I see in your life, in that you're someone who knows who he is and is expressing that in multiple capacities, not just in the work that you do, but also in your creative expression outside of your work. And so, yeah, it's a pleasure and privilege to chat to you about that journey today.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
Okay. So with that, let's start at the beginning. I like to set the stage with this idea of like, what did you want to be when you grew up? The
short answer is a vet. And then once I quickly realized I had fuck all like scientific prowess, I think I probably pivoted to wanting to do something a bit more creative. I think the longer answer is I grew up like really, hero worship's the wrong word, but like really impressed by like my dad, who was a creative. He was a musician, he is still a musician, but he had a creative career. He was a clarinet player and a composer. And I kind of, from a really young age, I remember being surrounded by musical instruments, music, people who were professional musicians and creative people. And so I think probably in that, that seemed really exciting and really alluring. Like a really strong memory of just being like on his knee as a kid, playing the piano. And I think for the longest time, I assumed it would be something in music, but that was very like ill-defined. Like it wasn't like I had a clear sense of what that was going to be.
Well, I mean, you grew up in a creative household, and I guess you recognize within yourself this creative person. And like most young people, you kind of are fumbling around a bit in the dark as you think about, you're kind of just grasping at whatever you do know about yourself in that moment and going from there. So you landed in London and you built the first decade of your career in business development for Cannes Festival of Creativity, which is, for everyone listening, it's like a marketing and advertising festival award show, which I imagine met some of your creative desires in a way.
Yeah, unexpectedly so. I spent the first couple of years in that job essentially in denial of what I was doing, which is quite a strange sensation because essentially like I had a job in sales, but I did not want a job in sales. And so, but like at the same time, like it was working for this very interesting company. I was surrounded by people who were really interesting. And it was a bit of a blank canvas. We knew that there were advertisers, advertising agencies, big companies, brands, media companies, all these different people who work and are involved in the like ecosystem of advertising and marketing who would come to the festival. And my job was essentially to sell them sponsorships And so, I was 23, 24, and all of a sudden I'm meeting all these people and having all these great conversations and starting to realize maybe, it awoke a part of me that had always been there, but I never really necessarily had the words to kind of define or describe it, which was actually that I was really interested in brands and branding and advertising. And this was a chance to kind of go and pursue that.
Amazing.
And I think it kind of spoke to the freedom I had in that job, although it was a sales job, was very much about being able to come up with creative ideas. And then there was the thrill of the chase of, could you then sell that idea to somebody? Would they pay for it? Certainly the early days of that job really felt like it was just go figure something out, see if somebody will invest in it, and then go bring it to life.
I love that, landing in this place and it bringing out or helping you discover a part of yourself that was always there, but needed the kind of framework to exist. And frankly, from what you're doing now, I can see how a lot of the experiences there set you up for what you do now in Super Okay. It's like entrepreneurial in a way. And we're going to get there because I think what I'm interested actually is, you did that for 10 years and, now you're a founding partner at Super Okay. And so I'm interested in the journey of leaving Cannes and ending up here at Super Okay, because that's where I meet a lot of my clients. It's like they've kind of done, they started their job early in their career. They've done it for, 10, 12, 15 years maybe. But they're suddenly like, wait, this no longer feels the way it once did, or, I don't feel, something feels wrong. And it's at that point that a lot of people crumble or just struggle to find the path towards the next thing. So I'd love you to talk about how you navigated that period of change for yourself.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the short answer is that I struggled a lot and it took quite a long time, I think. I think there was a period of a year or two there where I recognized that I probably was looking to do something else or want to do something more, but I didn't quite know what that was. There's something really powerful about getting to work in a job where you get to see the impact that has. You're not, you're not abstracted many, many steps away from it. It's like if I do a thing, I then meet the people that I get to do that thing or spent all that time working hard on, and I get to see the impact of the things that we did. And you get into this cycle with those types of jobs because, you're working up towards one big event every year. You spend 12 months of your year kind of working towards that. And so it's very easy to get into a point where you're like, well, I'm this far in now, so I might as well just stay and do it. And then you end up with these kind of windows, if you will, where you're like, maybe I'll start looking for this other thing. But because of the nature of the job that I had and some of the other things that were going on, I would find myself kind of back in those cycles. And then you find yourself drawn in and again and again. And that happened right up until March of 2020. Obviously, that moment was terrible for a huge number of people, but also I think there was a certain subset of people where stopping for a second and actually just sitting and being able to think made me, able to kind of maybe do a level of a slightly deeper level of reflection than I had previously. And I really started to be like, okay, maybe I need to go figure out what it is that I go do next. The problem was I had absolutely no idea what the answer to that was. And I also had managed to tell myself that the only things I were capable of doing were jobs that looked very similar to the job that I had currently. So I operated under the belief that the thing that I would do next would look very similar to the thing that I did prior. And I discounted the fact that I had tons of transferable skills and a whole other life of experience and other things that I was also knowledgeable and good at. And so it took a minute, and ultimately it took working with a coach, a British guy, to actually start to examine some of the stories that I told myself about who I was in the world, and who I was professionally, and to start to maybe examine some of those and see which of them were useful and which of them maybe I could disregard or kind of no longer hold on to.
If you're open to it, I would love to know just a couple examples of I thought this, but I had to actually realize that.
I mean, I think there's some fairly classic ones that I think a lot of people go through. One is, of course, I'd worked in that job for a long time. I'd been relatively successful. I'd got to a point in my career where I was earning a reasonable amount of money. And certainly some of my own professional success was being measured by the amount of money that I was being paid, the job title that I had. These are kind of classic markers of professional success. It's what's your salary? What's your job title? all those types of things. I definitely defined my success by those things. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I think they're good benchmarks for, am I doing well? Am I achieving the things that I want to? But I think it got to the point where I was probably a bit trapped by them, and I was unable to see beyond them in terms of like, what else could my life look like if I didn't have to worry about a particular salary that I needed to try and earn, or if I needed to have a particular job title or whatever. And those are useful thought exercises, not because I could just suddenly disregard, needing to earn a certain amount of money or whatever, but because when you start to explore what could life look like if I'm not like hemmed in by that particular constraint, you start to get some different answers. So I think there was definitely a really interesting exercise in there about like, okay, what if money didn't matter? Or what if you didn't have to have a particular job title? And then there was also, he did a really interesting exercise with me, which was, for me at least, really powerful, which was to like ask me what my values were. He was in a professional context, like, what are your values? And I was like, I haven't got a clue. No, no one's ever asked me that. I've never thought about that. And I guess I could probably instinctively tell you, like, I wanted to do, I wanted to work with good people and I didn't want to work with fucking awful people. Like, beyond that, I don't think I really had a strong sense of what my values were. And like that was such an unlock for me, because it meant that I could start to evaluate like what next might look like through the lens of like, would it answer to my values or like who I was? So like, beyond, did it pay a certain amount of money or did it give me a job title? I think it was like creativity, curiosity, and how you interact with people, like a level of like decency or that kind of stuff. And like, the moment I stopped asking myself, would my next job be based on like some very narrow things, and started to ask the question of, would this next opportunity or this next job like meet a set of values that I had defined as being important to me, everything started to become much bigger and much broader. And the way people reacted to me in interview situations also totally shifted, right?
Yeah.
Because it stopped being a conversation about, well, how much money are you going to pay me and what job title am I going to get? And it became a really deep, much deeper conversation around like, who are you? Like, who's the team? What types of work am I going to be doing? What sort of things is this role going to entail? And, the conversations I were having with people became a lot richer as a result of that. And I was able to make a much better judgment of, was it going to be an interesting thing to go and do?
Yeah, I also think that interviewers will be impressed with someone who has that level of understanding about who they are and what they want, when you can get into that level of conversation where you're almost interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. I think this really kind of improves the perception they have of you. You come across as a thoughtful person who is clear on what matters to them.
I think it definitely, it shifted the conversations that I had, and it made it easier to start to evaluate that stuff. And then I think the other side of that as well, or the other exercise I ended up doing that was really helpful, was just having lots of conversations with people in my network.
Totally.
And just talking to a bunch of people in a more open, slightly more open-minded way. And that was where the really interesting stuff started to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about having rich conversations. I often see the reason people are stuck is they're just applying to jobs on LinkedIn, and it's a very grim place. I call it the black hole of despair. But, really your network guides you, opens doors, it helps spark ideas within you, things connect that you wouldn't have expected. And there's also just, you get into this momentum, and that's how things start to flow toward you. You have to tell the universe who you are and what you want in order for the interesting opportunities to come your way.
Fully. And I think as well, like, go into listening mode a bit. Like, I think when you're looking for your next job or your next role, or you're trying to figure out where your career is going to go, it's easy to focus on you. But actually the most interesting stuff came from just having conversations and asking people, like, how did they make a change? So like, I found, ultimately, the reason that this came about was because I phoned my business partner's wife, who I'd worked with previously, and she had made an interesting career pivot. And I was just curious about it. I was like, I'd admired her and her work ethic and how she showed up in the world. And I was super curious about how she'd gone from one place to another. So I just phoned her one day and was like, can you tell me about this? And she spent a while explaining it to me, and it was super interesting and super helpful. And then it was actually at the end of that conversation, she was like, oh, by the way, do you know Anthony, is my business partner? Anthony's looking for somebody with your skill set for this thing that he's like trying to get off the ground. You guys should chat. And that, that one conversation led to another there. But like, it was in the moment where I had no interest in finding another job. My only intention there was just to listen and have a conversation and learn from her and her experiences. That's where it started to get more interesting.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, just surrounding yourself with people that inspire you, that you admire, that you can get inspiration from, I think, is magic happens in that space.
It definitely, it helped to that. Those are the types of things that really started to shift my understanding and I think I had to do a bunch of like breaking down I told myself a bunch of things about who I was and how I needed to show up in the world and like what success looked like. And I probably spent the best part of like, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months, like just breaking down each of those different things and talking it through and figuring out like what mattered and what didn't, and kind of rebuilding a little bit from a place that was a bit more neutral, so that whatever I was going to go and assess as being the next thing, I could do that from like a bit more of a measured place, like to make more informed judgment about it, I guess.
Amazing. Was there any other personal work that you did as part of that journey?
Alongside kind of having this job that had taken me around the world, and, you know, I'd moved to New York with it and all that kind of stuff, like I've been in this position in my career where like I was able to do a lot of client entertaining, and then I had also this kind of second, not career, but like this second like job of sorts, being a DJ and getting paid to do that and having that life as well. And like a lot of the things that I did in my life were about kind of entertaining and hosting, and I think somewhere along the way, like I developed a bit of an unhealthy relationship with alcohol as a kind of a way to avoid dealing with like some of my own personal kind of mental health problems or whatever you want to, problems, challenges, whatever. I basically decided I was going to give up drinking. I was like, I don't think I have a good relationship with this. Like on a physical level, like it was definitely causing me a bunch of like issues. You know, I'd been to see the doctor, they'd be like, you need to drink less, whatever. And then on a personal level, like it would just seem to exacerbate my own anxiety and self-loathing and all these other things that kind of like that self-doubt, all that kind of stuff had just crept in a lot. I think that's been really helpful, because the interesting thing about giving up drinking was it obviously made me healthier because I was drinking too much, and then obviously I stopped drinking, and that's beneficial for you from a health perspective. But also what it did was it left behind, what it didn't get rid of or what it didn't solve was all the underlying feelings that I had about myself and the world and all those types of things. They were all still there. What changed was that I could no longer, drink and avoid dealing with them. I had to start to deal with them. And I think in the process of doing what giving up drinking essentially forced me to do was to start to try and come to terms with that stuff and go and examine it a bit. And again, similar to the kind of stuff that I'd been through from a work perspective, in my personal life as well, you tell yourself stories about who you are in the world. You tell yourself stories about like, how you see yourself, how other people see yourself, how you feel about all these different types of things. And I think a lot of those stories along the way had probably got a little bit wonky. Like they didn't make a ton of sense, but like they had become tightly bound to my psyche. And I think that it was probably a really smart decision, because it meant that I finally stopped and started to try and deal with some of that stuff.
Yeah. Now that you've gone through that process, for anyone who's done personal work, it can be a process. What do you notice as like the impact in your life? What difference do you think it's made?
It's a great question. And I think it probably, for me, it fundamentally boils down to the process. So the process doesn't stop. Like, no. I don't think there's like an end to it. I don't think you magically come out one day and you're like, woohoo, I'm cured. I think what happens is, this isn't meant to sound flippant or trite, but I think it's about acceptance. And what you learn to do is to stop trying to change things about who you are and learn to accept all the different parts of who you are for what they are. And I think what's interesting is that what was interesting for me was that I started to see things that I previously had thought were bad as being positive things. They brought clarity, or they brought a level of like insight about something in my life that I didn't necessarily realize. Or like it allowed me to like recontextualize some things in some really helpful ways. Yeah. But I think ultimately again, this is an ongoing process for me, but it just kind of boils down to like learning to accept who you are for who you are.
Yeah.
And rather than trying to change that or make it something that it's not, it's just, you kind of just own it for what it is.
Yeah. I think there's a lightness, for me at least. I feel so much more lighter in my body, so much less heaviness, anxiety. There's a freedom, I think. And one of my favorite phrases is, it takes less energy to be yourself, because I think obviously there's a journey to get to that point that requires energy and input. But to me, it feels light.
I think I have days with it where I think I'm doing a really good job, and then I have days where I'm doing a fucking terrible job. Yeah. And I think it's just a kind of yo-yoing back and forth between those things in my mind of like wanting to achieve that sort of sense of lightness and self-acceptance, and then other days where I just fucking hate myself, and it is what it is. What's changed, I think, is that previously that would become all-consuming. Mm-hmm. That would swallow me. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't really know how to get myself out of it. Now, generally speaking, I'm better at identifying like, oh, it's one of those days, right? And then, you learn to kind of just sit with it a bit more, or just accept it for what it is, and it doesn't become all-consuming.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, I find myself using the roller coaster analogy quite a bit, but like the roller coaster used to be really high and really low, and now it's more kind of just sort of steady and has these occasional highs and little lows. But like, I think that middle ground there is where I find more comfort versus some of the more extreme ends of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So you progressed in the story. You landed at Super OK. You ended up, building this business from the ground up. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. And what I have noticed in this journey is, to me, it's very raw, the experience of being an entrepreneur. It's real life. Like there's a rawness to the way, like the life experience of building my own thing and having like my responsibility for my income to really be on my back. But that's also been very exhilarating for me in a way. And what I have loved about it is, I'm a coach and I'm obsessed with personal growth, but like the amount of work that like every new version of my business, every time I have a goal, I know that I need to become like a different person in order to achieve that. And so I'm wondering, like, you now have this successful design studio starting from nothing. Like, how has that gone, in your own journey of building this? Has that been hard? Where were the challenges?
I think it's been, like, broadly speaking, it's been a really positive experience. I think we've been really fortunate. We've had some great clients. We've got to do some great work, and we're continuing to do that. Where I think it's been challenging has probably been just learning to either manage my own ambition or my own like vision or whatever. Your whole sense of self cannot be defined by, is your business doing good or not? Because there's only so much of that I can control. And then beyond that, like, there's a myriad of other factors out there that may or may not influence that. And then also as well, like, it's not who I am. And even if Super OK fails tomorrow, and like, obviously I hope it won't, but if it does, it can't be all that I am either. Like, there has to be something after that. And so I think a lot of like my own struggles around this stuff have been like learning to put some space between me and the business, and learning to accept that, like, whether I'm good or not doesn't solely rely on like whether this business is successful or not. Because like any small business, we have good months, we have bad months, we have good quarters, we have bad quarters. Like, people do things, we do things, like mistakes are made, great things happen. Like, yeah, it's a roller coaster. It's all the things that entrepreneurship is. But then also as well, like, not letting it, both the really successful moments and then also the like really unsuccessful moments, like not letting either of them carry too much weight. You have to kind of just accept it for what it is in the kind of day-to-day sea of stuff that is part and parcel of running a business.
I love that.
And I think increasingly, like, the more I do it, the more that makes me really happy is like, do I get to work with people who I admire and think are really good people? And then do I get to work with clients who I admire and who have businesses that I think do great things? And we've been really lucky in that the vast majority of the people that we work with are great. And the clients that we work for are also really good people doing really interesting things. And that increasingly is far more rewarding than anything else.
I love that. I think that's very powerful, trying to like separate your sense of self-worth from your own business, especially when there's so much of you in the business. But so thank you.
I think that's actually probably one of the more interesting things there of like, one of the realizations that I had somewhere along the way in all of this was like, it went from being like a business that I worked for to being like an extension of myself somehow, because suddenly, you know, it wasn't like I was hiding behind a big company. I was the company. What I said was what happened. And all of a sudden you're a lot more accountable, but also as well, like the success and the failures feel much more tied to the things that you do, the decisions that you make, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a lot more way more personal than it ever was before. And I think that is a tough thing to navigate.
So with that in mind, how do you stay tethered in the midst of, you know, the uncertainty, the ups and downs?
I think it probably comes back to like having a degree of clarity around like what it is that you actually want to achieve and what success might look like. You know, measuring success, I think, across a number of different levels is a good way to kind of start to do that. Because then even if you're not being successful on certain metrics, there are other things that you can identify as being successful. Like it's a bit like going to the gym, right? It's like sometimes it's really hard, but eventually the compound interest of going regularly means that things look different to how they looked 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I would say it's the same with running a business, right? It's like if you are focused and if you have some things that you want to achieve and you focus on achieving those things, even if it takes a minute for everything to catch up, by the time that you've got there, you are stronger and you are hopefully a little bit wiser and more resilient than you were previously. There's a degree of running a business, particularly when you've got partners and all those types of things, where like I think you've got to treat it like it's a relationship, and you've got to show up in the way that you would show up to any other relationship that's good and healthy. Like you've got to be willing to be vulnerable. You've got to be willing to be honest. You've got to be willing to like figure stuff out and have moments where you're selfish and have moments where you're selfless and like own all of that stuff and just kind of keep moving forwards with it and hope that the people around you are trying to do the same kind of thing. And then I think like there's got to be a degree of levity. Is that the word that I'm looking for? Like taking a step back and kind of seeing it for what it is. And then also like a degree of resilience as well. You have literally just got to get up every day and keep on doing this thing. You know, the highs, the low lows, like if you get too caught up in all of that stuff and you're unable to kind of maintain a degree of resilience and focus with it, that's when I think it starts to consume you or you lose sight of what it is that you're really trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, for me in my own business, you know, I'm growing a lot at the moment. I'm relaunching the business, obviously, and this is part of that. Yeah, I feel I'm, you know, on a weekly basis processing anxiety, and the anxiety is covering fear, right? Because anxiety is a cover emotion. And, you know, just being honest with myself, right? That like, okay, Anne, like you're afraid of this, you're afraid of that. And like just even acknowledging my fear, that really helps me. And then I just say to myself, okay, this is here. But like now that I've processed it and been with it and acknowledged it, it's not running the ship because I see it, right? Like with fear, you always have to look it directly in the face.
Yeah.
Right? And I've done that. I'm like, okay, I see you, babe. You're here, but like you don't get to drive. Right. And I come back to like what I'm trying to build. And I like your point around, you know, getting up every day and just being like gradual gains, you know, where I am this week is better than last week, even if I wish I was where I'm going to be in 3 months now, you know? And so, yeah, thank you for that answer.
It's easy, I think, to get caught up in like, or it is for me anyway, get caught up in my own ambition or like my own desire.
Yeah.
And to not actually take a step back and be like, hey, there's some really good stuff in here. There's some really positive things. There's some great wins. And also like, guess what? I get to come to work every day and work with a bunch of great people and work on stuff that's really interesting and stuff that I'm passionate about and excited about. And like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think when you're connected to that, when you're like into the work itself, right? It's not about, making more money or whatever, but you're like, you know, I'm here to deliver this change in the world, right? Or the impact. And if you're connected to that impact, I think it helps you stay in a vibration that supports what you're trying to achieve, because it's about the impact and people can feel that alignment.
I think the not letting one of those things For me anyway, like there's a bunch of different things in there that are driving me. And like some of it's like ambition, some of it's like a desire to earn a certain amount of money or to achieve a certain goal, or like all those types of things. And like those are really helpful for me to like, they just keep me up and keep me moving forwards. I've got to do this thing. But also like not letting one of those things over-index and mean that I lose sight of the other things that are also important, that I also want to, you know, part of the reason why I chose to step away from working for a big corporate company and do my own thing was partly like about wanting to have freedom around decision making, wanting to go explore things, sometimes just wanting to do really dumb stuff that makes no money because we care about it or we like the people or we're excited by it. Conversely, getting to work with like big clients on, you know, really ambitious projects because we like their ambition and we're excited to work with them, all that kind of stuff. Like having the freedom, that sense of kind of a little bit more autonomy around the decision making was a big part of that for me. Like I wanted to go and see what that was going to be like what would that feel like?
I love that.
And that continues to, you know, when I'm like losing my head or whatever, often what brings me back is like just reflecting on like, there's lots of good stuff in there, really like positive stuff that's great to be able to focus on and keep me grounded more than anything else.
Totally. Yeah, it is that push. All right. Some questions to finish us up. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Care less about what strangers think about you because they don't matter. For whatever reason, I find myself worrying or looking for or seeking the validation of strangers or people that I barely know far more than the people that I know and love and care about. And I can't tell you why that is. Like I find it peculiar. I'll find myself like far more concerned about what the random person on the internet or like the person I barely know thinks versus like the people whose opinion I actually value. And I'm constantly having to like reset myself a bit on that and like remember it's like, hey, who cares? That will continue to be something that I have to work on as I get older, I reckon. Yeah,
we all have our things and here's to the journey. And if you could put a message on a billboard in Times Square, what would it say?
If I was to put something on, I don't know thyself. Period. I mean, I think that that's very true to this conversation we've had and even the way we opened it, right? You know, we talked about self-awareness, right? And how important that is and how that's been a quest for you. And so that makes a lot of sense. Wait, hang on a second. It's not know thyself, although, yeah, that could be. It's make DJing cool again. That's really what should go on a billboard. That's what I think about a lot lately. DJing is fucking lame these days. So lame. Tell me more about that. I mean, it's always been fun, but when you really think about it, it's literally just a guy with some records playing some stuff, making people dance. It's the dancing and the dancers that really make it interesting. But like, it's become this like very performative, like nonsense thing and has very little to do with music and a lot to do with just a bunch of silly shit. And I just think it's become remarkably lame. A lot of the culture around it is very divorced from, you know, the basic principle of like bringing people together and enjoying music and all of that kind of stuff. And as it's become a, you know, like a desirable career or whatever, it's just become sillier and sillier, to be honest with you. And so what would make DJing cool? Destroying TikTok, blowing up all of that. I don't know. You know, I think there are a bunch of DJs out there who do things that are still what I would call, you know, consider to be really cool. And most of those people are just like, they're doing their own thing unapologetically, but it's mostly just centered around playing the music that they love and removing a lot of the like performative side of it. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like the performing in a room or whatever. I mean like just the noise and the nonsense and a lot of the like social media-y type stuff, which has nothing to do with, are you good at selecting records and making people dance? It has everything to do with stupid hot takes or tricks or some other bullshit that doesn't matter. I love that hot take. I mean, I love that in Times Square. Make DJing cool again. Rob, thank you so much for being here. This was such a great conversation. Thank you for being so open about your journey and what you've gone through. And I know that there'll be a lot of people who get value from this. So thank you. Thanks for having me, Anne. It's a pleasure. Thanks for tuning into Character. I hope these stories inspire you to trust yourself, bet on yourself, and do the work where needed. You are the artist of your life. Go create something unique and awesome. Don't forget to subscribe to the Character Substack.
The link is in the show notes. Here you'll get photos of each guest in their creative space, alongside their New York City recommendations. I also share my analysis as a coach on why each guest is so aligned and thriving. And if you're enjoying the show, follow or leave a review. It helps other people like you find and get value from the podcast too. The music on this podcast was arranged by the New York-based artist, DJ, producer, and underground legend Michael Mackin.